When researching, either online or in books about the Wars of the Roses, it's inevitable that sooner or later you will come across the artwork of Graham Turner. Whether it's his iconic image of Richard III in his final charge at Bosworth, or his painting showing the opposing forces at the Battle of Towton, arrayed in the snow just before they engaged, his artwork is evocative and, quite frankly, I find it quite inspiring as a wargamer. My personal favourite is an image that he's created for one of the smaller engagements, a battle that is sometimes overlooked in favour of the larger, more well-known clashes between the warring houses of York and Lancaster. I'm talking about the Battle of Edgecote. Graham Turner's image shows the battle at its turning point. The main two subjects of his painting are the brothers, William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, and his younger brother, Richard Herbert of Colebrook. These are two characters that I've wanted to add to my Yorkist forces for a while, and I thought why not try and mimic the Turner image using the Perry 28mm plastic Wars of the Roses miniatures that I've been using for the rest of my army. I want to try and recreate the Herbert brothers, as shown in his painting, along with the retinue of troops that is supporting them. So this video is just going to chart that progress and also give a bit of background on William Herbert as well as the Battle of Edgecote itself.
So to get things started, I basically got one of the sprues from the Foot Knight set from Perry and one of the sprues just from the standard Wars of the Roses infantry from Perry as well, and I just started trimming down pieces, cutting out bits, just trying to find things that matched. I've developed quite a large bits box because I've been doing my Wars of the Roses project now for over a year, and I managed to find the axe that he's wielding from the mounted men-at-arms set, and with a few head swaps and arm swaps you can pretty much pose these into any way that you want. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find two models that look exactly the same throughout any armies that are built using these sets. So basically what I did was I trimmed everything down, I got it in the pose I wanted, and then I had to use green stuff to create the longer sleeves, which you'll see in the picture. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this running, and I'm going to fill you in a bit about William Herbert.
So who was William Herbert? Well, William Herbert was born in 1423 at Raglan in the Welsh Marches. He was the son of Sir William ap Thomas, who was a veteran of the 100 Years' War. His family had already established a good record of service to the English kings, and while the family was from the gentry class, it was not one of the great noble families. Yet, by the end of his life, he was one of the foremost men in Edward IV's realm. Herbert followed his father to seek renown in the French wars, and there he would gain vital military experience that would become invaluable to him in the future. By the end of the 1440s, he had become the captain of Carrington. However, his time in the French wars was abruptly ended when he was captured following one of the many battles in which he participated. However, he didn't really have much to worry about because it was customary at the time to be ransomed, and that happened to him and he returned home. Once back in Wales, he would discharge his duties as a local lord, becoming a prominent figure in the turbulent kingdom. In much of Wales, responsibility for maintaining law and order lay with the Marcher Lords. However, they often resided elsewhere. This meant that they needed good local men who they could trust, to whom they could delegate authority. Herbert would earn the trust of several lords, including the Earl of Warwick, the man who history would later call the Kingmaker, and Richard, Duke of York. As turmoil in England continued, and the prospect of civil war became more and more likely, Herbert started to realise that he'd have to throw his lot in with one side or the other. By 1454, Herbert allied himself with York, stating that he was no man's man but the Duke's. Following the First Battle of St Albans, he would ally with fellow Welsh gentry and seize two Welsh castles, which would result in the capture of one, Edmund Tudor, who would then contract an illness, which most people believe to be plague, and die, leaving behind him a sole son named Henry Tudor, something which would later go on to plague the Yorkists somewhat. The constant toing and froing between the houses of York and Lancaster meant that it was hard for a lord to maintain favour with both. Despite siding against him previously, Herbert would commission a book intended as a gift for the Lancastrian king Henry VI, and here it is. And in this book there's an illustration which we can see includes a depiction of Herbert and his wife kneeling before the feet of the king. However, this reconciliation was short-lived. When York again returned and defeated the royal forces at Northampton in 1460, Herbert would once and for all ally himself irrevocably with the Yorkist cause. However, things did not go entirely to plan. The Duke of York was killed at the Battle of Wakefield in December 1460. Leadership of the House of York passed to his eldest son, Edward, Earl of March. Herbert was with Edward at the Battle of Mortimer's Cross on the 3rd of February 1461. Edward crushed the Lancastrian forces led by Jasper Tudor, and Herbert was at Edward's side. Herbert would go on to fight at the Battle of Towton, where the Lancastrians were again defeated. When Edward, now king, rewarded his supporters, he chose to confer the important offices in South Wales upon Herbert. Importantly, this was in preference to his chief ally, the Earl of Warwick. This act confirmed the Welshman's status as a prominent member of the new regime. It was at this time as well that Herbert became ennobled and was also made a Knight of the Garter. While the main Lancastrian cause was ended at Towton, pockets of resistance continued to defy Edward's rule. The resistance in Wales was led by Jasper Tudor, brother to Edmund, who, as already mentioned, had died in Yorkist captivity. With his younger brother Richard by his side, Herbert laid siege to Pembroke Castle, defeated Jasper Tudor, and then he also captured Jasper's nephew, Henry, who we know is the future King Henry VII. Interestingly, on a side note, Henry Tudor would go on to spend his formative years in the Herbert household as a ward, and there were even plans for him to marry one of Herbert's daughters. And later, much later, when Henry was king and he was dictating to his royal biographer, Polydore Virgil, he described his upbringing in the Herbert household as honourable, so I don't think we can really say he was mistreated. In October 1461, Herbert once again defeated Jasper Tudor at the Battle of Twit Hill near Carnarvon, which forced him overseas. However, he would return to Wales in 1468 with French support. However, Herbert responded with a determined and brutal campaign, and Tudor was once again forced into exile. As a reward, Edward made Herbert the Earl of Pembroke, a title which was previously held by Jasper Tudor, and this was the height of Herbert's achievements, as through this position he effectively ruled Wales in the name of the king. With his new position, Herbert set about a new building programme at Raglan Castle. He increased its size and grandeur to now fit somebody of his status. However, it's at this time that he would earn the enmity of his one-time friend and patron, Warwick, the kingmaker. Edward's favour for Warwick was fast disappearing for far too many reasons. There's probably not enough time to go into them in this video. However, the king's favour on Herbert probably hadn't gone unnoticed by Warwick, and in my opinion, I think it's fair to say that Herbert could probably consider himself a marked man. In 1469, Warwick had finally had enough of Edward ignoring his advice and ruining his plans. He decided that he would make himself heard through force of arms. He devised a strategy whereby one of his chief lieutenants, under the guise of a Robin of Redesdale, would stir unrest in the north. This was most likely Sir John Conyers and his brother sharing an assumed identity. While Edward and his armies were dealing with the insurrection in the north, he would attack with his armies from the south. And this is exactly what he did. Edward moved north to confront the rebels, and when he did, he called on Herbert as well as the Earl of Devon to assist him. The stage was now set for the Battle of Edgecote. So, as you can see, I undercoated the model in a light grey once I'd finished putting it all together and everything had finished curing on the green stuff. And as you can see, William Herbert's livery is a blue and red, so I used a contrast paint Blood Angels Red just to start blocking in the colours. And I started using the contrast paints to do all my base work on my livery jackets. For the blue side of the livery jacket, I used Talassar Blue from the contrast paints, and again I just block this in. Now it doesn't matter too much if it goes on other areas because I can just go over this again later with a highlight colour. Here I'm going to use the P3 paint Cador Red base, and I use that to basically form a first stage highlight on all of the red areas. So I leave the contrast paint in the recess bits and then just start working it up on the flatter areas and the areas where it's going to be more light. For the final highlight on the red part of the Serco, I mix in some Cador Red highlight in with the Cador Red base, and I just pick out the extreme areas on the red side, and then that's the Serco done, for the red at least. And when it comes to the blue, I'm using the Vallejo Game Colour Electric Blue, and I'm doing much the same as I did with the red, just hitting those higher broad areas to begin with. For the final highlight on the blue Serco, I add a bit of the GW Paint Ulf 1 Grey into the electric blue, and just use that to pick out some of the extreme highlights. And then that's the blue on the surcoat done. Right, so because I want this guy's armour to actually look a bit more expensive, I'm giving it a much lighter undercoat than I would, say, for normal men-at-arms. So I used a Vallejo Air Colour Chrome for this, so I just paint that all over the armoured areas and on the weapon itself. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I just use the GW Paint Dryad Bark to pick out the haft of his axe. And it's at this point as well that I use P3 Paint Sanguine Highlight to base coat the scabbard, which will hopefully give it a bit of a red leather look. For the wash over the armour, I'm going to use the contrast paint Basilicanium Grey and just paint that all over the metal areas that are just undercoated with the Vallejo Air Colour. I'm now using Retributor Armour, and I'm just using that to pick up some of the gold areas on the armour. He's got this sort of gold bit on top of his helmet where the plume comes from, and there's also the gold details on the sword and the scabbard. So now I come to the bit that I think a lot of people dislike, and that's painting the livery coat. So William's livery is 3 white lions, so I'm using a off-white, I think it was All-For-One Grey, and basically I dot it in. The lion rampant is sort of a shallow S shape, so I create that and then I use dots to create the broad shapes of the lion. Again, you know, this is going to be 3 foot away on a gaming table, so I'm not going to go for mega detail here. I just add a quick wash of Blood Angel's Red over the red leather on the scabbard. So to add some wear and tear and a bit of dust onto his armour, I use some Umber Weathering pigments. These are from Pro Pigments, and I fix that in place with white spirits. I basically smush it onto the model with a brush and then fix it with the white spirit. And here he is. So I'm pretty pleased with how he's come out. It's not a complicated model to paint, and I think I've done a decent job given the scale. I also wanted to mimic the Turner image as much as I could without restricting myself, which is why I didn't bother trying to get the axe upright like it is in the picture, because it would have covered up too much of the coat of arms, and if I'm going to paint it I want it to be seen. But I think there's a decent likeness there. As well, I did his brother at the same time using the same painting techniques, and I tried to get him in as much of the same pose. So there we are. Right, well I'm going to finish up the rest of the Retuin, but while I do that, why don't we actually have a look at the Battle of Edgecott itself. So, where we last left, Edward was moving north to confront what he considered to be a small rebellion. However, by the 9th of July, he'd realised that it was not just facing a small local rabble full of rowdy peasants, but rather a vast organised host. To add to his concerns, rumours had reached him that Warwick had turned against him, along with his own brother George, Duke of Clarence. The rumours were confirmed 3 days later when Warwick finally announced his intentions. Edward, realising his position was untenable, retreated to Nottingham, hoping to combine his forces with those of Herbert and Devon, who were en route to meet him. However, the rebel forces under Robin of Redesdale outflanked the king's position to try and join with Warwick's forces in the south, which were then moving north. Herbert had already joined forces with Devon and were now only about a day away from the rebels who were moving south. However, it's at this point that the fateful Battle of Edgecott would take place. The sources do disagree on what happened. Some of them have stated that Devon and Herbert quarrelled over the billeting arrangements in the village of Banbury that's near the battlefield. Others say that it was over a woman. Ultimately, the cause doesn't really matter though, because the effect was still the same. The Earl of Devon took his forces and separated from Herbert's. As Devon's part of the army held the majority of the archers, this was quite a problem, and one which would prove disastrous in the coming battle. On the evening of the 25th of July, the opposing armies camped on the either side of the River Cherwell. The following morning, the armies prepared to face each other. Now, while there are a number of sources which recount the course of the battle, there are of course varying degrees of reliability, and as with everything to do with the Wars of the Roses, they can be very contradictory. However, the sources do indicate the core of the battle lies within the area that has been identified as Danesmore. Herbert's army is estimated to have had between 5,000 and 6,000 Welsh infantry and cavalry. As for the rebels under Robin of Reedsdale, it's unclear how many troops are under his command, but they certainly included a significant number of archers, something that we know the Earl of Pembroke was lacking, Devon having left. According to one chronicler, the next day the action began with a struggle to secure the river crossing, in which the rebels were pushed back. It is indicated that the Earl of Devon may have taken part in the action, but if he did, he certainly didn't take any further part in the next phase of the battle. The rebels, having been defeated at the bridge, now moved south to take up fresh positions. The chronicler, Edward Hall, who wrote in 1548, describes the main action of the battle. Herbert drew his men up on one of the 3 hills to the south of the River Cherwell. He took the western position, while the rebels formed on the eastern hill opposite. While Herbert was waiting for reinforcements from Devon, the rebels would make the first move. They descended from their position on the eastern hill into the valley between the 2 hills. Once they were in range, they unleashed volleys of arrows into the assembled royalist lines at the top of the hill. Herbert, who was lacking any archers to counter this, due to Devon having left him the night before, was left with little option. He ordered a general advance and his forces descended from the hill to engage the rebel forces in close quarters. The quality of Herbert's troops and tactics proved particularly effective here. After the initial setback against the arrow storm, Herbert's forces started to gain the upper hand over the rebels, even killing the brother of Sir John Conyers. The rebel army was on the verge of collapse when it reformed and renewed its assault. It is in this melee that Edward Hall gives us a description of the Herbert brothers fighting. It goes as follows. The Earl of Pembroke behaved himself like a hardy knight and expert captain, but it's his brother Sir Richard Herbert who so valiantly acquitted himself that with his poleaxe in his hand, and as his enemies did afterwards report, he twice by fine force passed through the battle of his adversaries, and without any mortal wound returned. If every one of his fellows and companions in arms had done but half the acts with which he did that day by his noble prowess, the Northmen would have obtained neither safety nor victory. And it's here that it all went wrong for Herbert. It's at this critical stage that the rebel reinforcements arrived. According to Hall, they appeared over the hill immediately to the east, and they were the advance party of the Earl of Warwick's army. We have another quote from Hall about this moment, crying, "O Warwick, O Warwick!" The Welshmen, thinking that the army of Warwick had come with them with all his pursuance, suddenly his men amassed and fled. It's this moment of the battle that Graham Turner captures so excellently in his artwork. We can see the brothers fighting side by side, and we can also see the vanguard of the Earl of Warwick's force arriving in the background. Herbert's forces were routed, and the Earl himself was captured along with his brother. It's here that Warwick's contempt for his former ally can be seen. The brothers were taken back to Banbury, where Herbert pleaded for the life of his younger brother, citing his good character and the chivalrous deeds that he'd shown on the battlefield that day. However, those pleas fell on deaf ears. William Herbert, 1st Earl of Pembroke, was taken along with his brother to Northampton the next day. They were both beheaded on the Kingmaker's orders. King Edward IV himself, his forces having melted away at the news of the defeat at Edgecote, was taken and placed under the Earl of Warwick's protection, effectively imprisoned. This was just the opening action of the second phase of the Wars of the Roses. Within a year the king was free, and further blood would be shed as the rival factions struggled to control for the throne. So, with all of the history out of the way, it's time to just finish off these bases. As you can see, I wanted to mimic the painting, so I've mounted both William Herbert and his brother on one base, and I've put their standards behind each other. These are from Freezy Water flags. I've then created a mix of foot knights and all bill-armed infantry to put on the other bases, and I've chosen all bill-armed infantry purely because of what we just heard about Devon. I use a static grass applicator to start the groundwork on here, and it really does make life a little bit easier, to be honest. I've used a mix of dead grass and spring grass to give it a moorland effect. And here is the finished unit, and I'm really pleased with them. I hope you guys like it. I've got to actually say a thank you to Graham Turner, because I was having some problems identifying the livery badge to actually put on the troops. Some of the research I'd done showed the idea that it was a green dragon, but that's not what he had painted in his picture. So I thought the best thing to do was actually just contact him, and he was kind enough to come back to me and actually said that it's not a green dragon. That's basically one of the later Herberts. This is a bascule, which is a counterweight for a drawbridge, and is actually the symbol of this part of the Herbert family. And if you go to Raglan Castle, you can actually see this symbol all over it from when he was doing his building works. So a big thank you to Graham for sharing that with me. Overall, I'm really pleased. I quite like doing these little units. They tell part of the story of the Wars of the Roses, and it just gives it a chance to, do something a little bit different. So what I'll do here, I'll just show you the rest of the bill-armed men. So as you can see, we've got some armoured guys in there. There's this guy at the front who I've tried to show has been wounded by an arrow. And on this side, we've got the man advancing, calling the other men forward as they advance upon the rebels. What I will do though is I will of course throw up another image of the Graham Turner painting, and then I will show you what I've managed to create with these models and with a few of my other models on, in trying to not mimic it but just pay tribute to it. Anyway, I hope you guys like this video. It's something a little bit different. Let me know what you thought. Is there anyone else in the Wars of the Roses that you'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about? I hope you're all staying safe, and I will see you all again soon. Cheers.